Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and good morning to you in the UK. First of all, I want to thank you and the organization of Kashmir Coalition for arranging this important event. I think it's a critical time to do this because the world is engulfed, as we know, by the COVID pandemic. And because of that, a number of other critical issues, pressing humanitarian issues, are not making the headlines. But it's crucial for us to keep this conversation going. What I want to do here on the behalf of the government of Pakistan, and I'm very glad to see my colleague, His Excellency the High Commissioner, who will also be taking the floor later. And what we plan to do, at least I will now speak to you on 5 issues, very briefly. One, what is the context in which the Kashmir tragedy is unfolding? Second, what has India done in Indian-occupied Kashmir since August 5th? Third, specifically a medical emergency that we are not paying attention to. Fourth, the character of the Kashmir struggle, the right to self-determination of the Kashmiris. And fifth, what is Pakistan's view and what are we trying to apprise the world of? So let me just begin by saying that I think no conversation on Kashmir can be complete right now unless we understand that the India that we are dealing with and the world is having to deal with today is not the India that one used to talk about, or the world used to point to Pakistan saying, here is a secular country, the largest democracy and everything we heard. We are dealing with an India that is fascist, that is showing increasing similarities with the, unfortunately I have to say, the Nazi regime, as outlandish as it may seem to many. I can tell you that we in Pakistan at least are in shock at just how similar the current mindset and the vibes coming from India are to what the world witnessed at the time. We've seen senior Indian government leaders like Amit Shah call Muslims termites. We've seen a whole campaign blaming the corona pandemic on Muslims. Let me remind you, there was something called the typhus epidemic during the Second World War, in which the Hitler regime, the Nazi regime, blamed it on the Jews. And if you look at the rhetoric of what we're hearing in India and what we heard then, you will not find a difference. I only know of 2 other instances in history. The Jews were called rats during the Nazi regime. The Tutsis in Rwanda were called cockroaches. Both those episodes ended up in genocide. I think it's also important to keep in mind that the current Indian leadership has itself professed an expansionist ideology. Back in September 2019, the Indian foreign minister talked about taking and wanting to take physical jurisdiction over Azad Jammu Kashmir, AJK. Other senior ministers in India have said the same thing. So I want to be clear that when we talk about Kashmir today, we have to keep in mind we are dealing with a country that in itself has argued that it's revisionist and has an expansionist agenda, and the RSS ideology even talking about Akhund Bharat and the entire South Asian parts of China being part of it. So that cannot be ignored when we talk about this. So what has happened since August 5th in India? I think that's equally important to recognize. We've talked about Article 370 being abrogated, the special status of Kashmir, which was the sanctity of this dispute as far as the Kashmiris were concerned on the Indian occupied side. We've seen the Reorganization Act that's talked about and has changed land laws, removing of boards written in Urdu and Kashmiri, and most recently, the domicile law. What does the domicile law in spirit say? Essentially, this is an overt move to change the demographic nature of Indian occupied Kashmir. Let me also say that we in Pakistan have constantly talked about the fact that India's ultimate goal is illegal unilateral moves to change the demography of Indian occupied Kashmir. And this now is an overt, explicit expression of that agenda and of that goal. In addition to these illegal moves, which India claims are domestic but cannot be because Kashmir is a legally recognized dispute by the UN, we have seen India use state terrorism to kill as many as 33 Kashmiri youth, injure over 150 of them. We are seeing false encounters. We are seeing enforced disappearances, arrests, and killings. And we are seeing, and this tells you the state of mind of the authorities, even the remains of the martyrs in Kashmir are not being handed back to their families, we hear. This is how an indigenous freedom struggle is being treated in Kashmir. Let me add to this one other very important point that I haven't heard made as much as I think it should in the current global environment. What we are seeing in India, and specifically with regard to Kashmir, is a pandemic being used to further cement illegal moves of occupation in the territory. On the one hand, we hear that in Indian occupied Kashmir, there are only 17 fatalities because of corona. On the other hand, the entire valley is declared a red zone. A lockdown is further increased. Internet services that were provided in limited bandwidth have been reversed. You can't even actually function in terms of getting medical support. I don't need to remind this learned audience that the Geneva Convention, the fourth Geneva Convention, Article 59, mandates India not only to ensure provision of medical supplies and healthcare to the people of Kashmir, but also it mandates them to give access to international agencies like Doctors Without Borders, ICRC, and others. This is a critical point that I want to emphasize. The fourth Geneva Convention is not being breached only in terms of what India does in the occupied territory with its security forces, but specifically in the pandemic. The world needs to recognize that India is actually breaching and violating the fourth Geneva Convention, Article 59. And I would make a formal appeal to organizations like Doctors Without Borders, like ICRC, like the International Medical Corps, to actually go into Indian occupied Kashmir and alleviate some of the suffering in that region. Elevate this illegal occupation, at least get these people the necessary medical help so that people don't die of this epidemic and we never find out. So I think this is an area that's not being looked at as closely as we need to. I think there need to be proactive efforts, and I'm appealing to the international community to look at this as a medical crisis, as a medical emergency, as a medical genocide, quite frankly, and go in and get access to help these people in need. One word about the Kashmiri struggle itself. So I don't need to repeat this because I think it's become so predictable now that India will continue to give the Kashmiri struggle a color of terrorism. I think it's important, and I hope after I finish and leave the forum, there is a conversation about the face of the Kashmiri struggle. Today, it is the educated Kashmiri youth in the valley that are standing up against India's illegal occupation and oppression. So this conversation about, oh my God, it's terrorism, it's Pakistan, these are Kashmiri youth living in the occupied territory. Their names are available. They're not even hiding anymore. That's the conversation to have. This is a completely changed character. From peaceful protests, you are forcing people to become violent. When India talks about, oh, there's been violence in Indian occupied Kashmir, we are seeing protests, we have seen violence. I want to ask a question. Are you dealing with animals in cages in Indian occupied Kashmir? Because if you are dealing with human beings, human nature will force them to react when you treat them like animals. And when they react, please don't look elsewhere. Look at your policy. Look at what you've done since August 5th. And even a small kid on the street can tell you that you are asking for trouble yourself. And I'm very glad to note that even the Western press and media are no longer using the word terrorism, which was very unfair to begin with, but was used for years. They are using the word self-determination. They're talking about the struggle. They're talking about the fact that the pandemic is being used to perpetrate fascist policies and genocidal tendencies by the Indian security forces. Let me bring all of this together to make a final concluding observation, which is, where does Pakistan stand on all of this? Because this is another thing that India has tried very hard to misconstrue and convince the world that there may be some problem on the other side. Two parts to this, ladies and gentlemen. First, since August 5th, Pakistan has said two things and two things alone. Number one, the open jail called Indian occupied Kashmir, and specifically the Kashmir Valley, needs to be removed, and the basic humanitarian considerations and human rights of the Kashmiris need to be honored. This is not a point about real estate. I want to be clear. Pakistan is not talking about this as a real estate first and foremost. Yes, there is an issue over territory. Yes, there is a recognized dispute. And yes, Pakistan stands by the UN resolutions and wants a resolution in that stead. But what we are asking immediately since August 5th is to alleviate the human suffering of the people who have been put in cages like animals, the open jail, as I said. What is the second point Pakistan is making? Let international law operate to find a solution to the problem. You want to talk as India? Pakistan is ready. Go back to the pre-August 5th situation, sit down and resolve the issues in the spirit that the international community, i.e. the UN, has already prescribed. Only 2 points that Pakistan has made: human rights of the Kashmiris and international law. There is not a third point, ladies and gentlemen. So I want to be absolutely clear. Now, what is India doing? It is talking about the same old narrative of infiltration. So I want to make a very important point to all of you, and I would hope that this is also discussed. India has 900,000 security forces across the line of control in Indian occupied Kashmir in various forms. India has one of the most extensive anti-infiltration grids that they themselves say they've laid down on their side of the line of control, the side that they occupy. So I want to ask you a question. What is this apparatus doing? Is there any evidence that it's been breached? How has it been breached? Aren't the world's satellites looking over a disputed war zone? If they are, where is the evidence? And let me make an offer formally. We have told the UNMOGIB, the UN observers that are present here, and India does not allow on its side, to come and see AJK for themselves, come and see the territory and the ground situation whenever they want. We've gone further. We have told the diplomatic presence of various countries in Islamabad, don't give us any notice. Tell us when you want to visit. Half an hour notice, come and see whatever you want to see on our side, wherever you want to see it. We've gone further, ladies and gentlemen. We have even asked the Indian mission, come with us. Tell us where you want to go, we'll take you. There are only two ways to get to reality and truth if two sides disagree. Either we get evidence, or people can go and see for themselves. There has never been and will never be evidence of a falsehood, but we are telling you, we are telling the UN again and again, come and see whatever you want. That's how clean our hands are. But we cannot allow India to continue escalating tensions on the line of control, continue killing innocent women and children. Remember, the topography of the LOC is such that we have villages on the LOC, India does not. And so when they shell indiscriminately and kill civilians. They've already killed a civilian this year, and they've injured many more on our side of the line of control. I want the world to recognize you're talking of two nuclear powers. There is a limit to our patience as well. We want what? Ceasefire in 2003 was agreed. Go back to that. Not a bullet will be fired. If we go back to that, human lives will be saved. When the UN Secretary General talks about truce in war zones, when resolutions are tabled to ensure that areas where there is violence, there are war zones, go silent so that we can fight the pandemic, we, Pakistan, stand for that, and India ignores it. Let me finally bring all of this together with three one-line points that I want to leave you with, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have before I leave. Number one, an appeal to the world, to the international organizations, ICRC, the Medical Corps, Doctors Without Borders. Go to IOK and help people who are dying and not having a voice because of the medical emergency that has been created because of the so-called lockdown, which is, as I said, an open jail, unfortunately, since August 5th. Second, please take notice and for the UN to investigate the forced killings, disappearances, arrests that are taking place in IOK. Third, pay attention to what India is doing on the line of control as a distracting ploy to put attention away or take attention away from what they are doing in Indian occupied Kashmir, which is fulfilling day by day the agenda, the illegal agenda of demographic change in Indian occupied Kashmir. Look at the LOC. Please don't show up when there is a crisis and people talk about, oh my God, what's going to happen. Show up now, get the ceasefire implemented by the Indians so that we can focus on more important priorities, but not at the cost of ignoring that Kashmir is simmering, people are reacting, and the dispute has to be resolved on an urgent basis. Pakistan's only and only talking about the humanitarian issue and the legal issue. And that is our right and our responsibility. This is ultimately a self-determination struggle proven to be indigenous for the Kashmiris. They need a voice. Pakistan stands by them. We have always, we will remain so. But this is not the India that people used to talk about. We were always skeptical in Pakistan. It's showing its true colors. The world must intervene on the medical side, on the legal side, the dispute resolution side, and on the violence side, on the line of control, as well as within Indian occupied Kashmir. I thank you for listening to this.